Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cha Cha, and today I'm going to be going over some behavioral science principles. Primarily, they're important in psychology or just in general when you're like running experiments, which is validity and reliability. Um, First, I kind of want to talk about validity, which is how accurate is your experiment. So, reliability will kind of be um, more of like how replicable your experiment is. But it doesn't really matter how like replicable you are, or like how many times like you're close to that bullseye, right? It's my rings. Doesn't matter how many arrows you fire, right? As long as they are like close together, close to that bullseye, right? Like, and they're all close together, that's great. That's kind of like validity. It's just like by that bullseye. Whereas replicability is how close together those trials are. Whereas if you were to have something like this with the bullseye, see, they're still on the board, but they're nowhere close to that bullseye. They're all close together, though, each of your experiments, you could interpret as your results. But they're far away from that bullseye, so they're not accurate results. So your study isn't very good. Even though you keep on getting like very similar results, it's not accurate. It's not showing how things actually are. Um, Whereas we could have something like this too, which can have great validity, but for replicability. So maybe they're all on opposite sides surrounding that bullseye, but they're still kind of accurate, but you're just not getting as good results. Still, it's like your study is just all over the place. So you kind of want to narrow it down and be like, hey, like what's happening? Like why is this bad? And chances are, if you don't have good validity, then you probably won't have good replicability. The two kind pretty much go in hand in hand. So the first thing I want to talk about is face validity. That's also known as internal validity. That's probably what you'll hear it more often, but and this is measuring like your how well does your measure capture your construct. So for example, if I'm measuring alcoholism, right? Alcoholism rates. And my measure will be like asking how many drinks someone's had in the past week. Is this like a good measure? Like, do you think it's accurate? Whereas like let's say I have something that's like, oh, I'm measuring how often someone goes to a bar. That probably won't be as accurate as like the drinks themselves, right? Since like if you go to a bar, you're not necessarily drinking. Um you could just be like hanging out. It could be more of a social thing too. Maybe you're getting some food. Some bars have good food. Most don't, but you never know. That's kind of what it means. It's like your face value. So just taking it as it is. It's like the most pure form of validity. Just because if your construct isn't good, or if the measure that you're using for your construct isn't good, chances are the rest of your experiment won't be either. Then there's also convergent validity. So converge is means to like overlap. So like how well does this measure overlap with other measures? So other like valid measures. So these measures have already been proven to be like pretty accurate. So for example, like with our method of alcoholism, you can compare it to others people. Like maybe it's like someone has a study where it's like drinks per day, or maybe, for example, like that bar thing, maybe that actually is a pretty valid study. Um, for example, like just measuring like, hey, like, are you seeing similar results? Or are your results kind of all over the place? And if your results are all over the place, and those studies have already been proven to be accurate, like if your results are like, for example, let's say, um, you have like, I don't know, for example, like this is like completely out of the way. Someone like the valid results has like 7, whereas like your results have like 100. Something's probably wrong with yours, right? Since this has already been valid, it's been proven by the scientific community. Chances are your technique with that, since it's just so out there, there's something going on a little bit. And then I want to talk about discriminant validity. So, this makes sure our measure is unique for our variable. so that you can discriminate between other unrelated measures. So for example, there's a lot of times where like certain constructs can be pretty similar to each other. So for example, like going back to that our alcoholism example, like maybe you're just looking like broadly over like drug usage or pot usage. So like you want to make sure that it's different, that you could like really hone in, especially if you're asking for like something that's specific. So it wouldn't be good if you're having like how many times like someone go like consumes like drugs or like goes to parties, for example, right? Since there's a lot that can be happening there. So that wouldn't be a very good like discrimination between those two measures for that construct, for our construct. And then there's the last one I want to talk about for validity, which is external validity. This is like, are your results generalizable to the general public? So, all the times when you're doing studies, you're always going to, or experiments, you're always going to be using a sample because there's no way you can measure the entire population. But you want to make sure that your sample is pretty like representative of your population. So for example, like in the US, right? Like we have a pretty diverse population, like all sorts of ethnicities, races. So you want to make sure, like when you're doing a sample, that you include something that's representative of your population. So you don't want just to have like everyone that's like all like for example like white in your sample or like all one like female or all male. You want to have a nice melting or like mixed bag, I guess. And then for reliability, this is like how consistent is your experiments? So for example, like going back, right? This is like our shining armor, knight in shining armor, where it's like that it's by that bullseye, which is accurate, and then all of the arrows that you threw are close to each other. This would also be something that has good reliability, but it wouldn't have good validity because it's not by that bullseye, but all of the arrows are close together. So that's just like, excuse me, an example of reliability. So there's a couple different types that I want to go over. So there's test retest validity, which is kind of self-explanatory. So like if you have the same person, if they were to do your experiment again, would the results be similar? So for example, if you were to have them do it like one day later, would you have the same results? Is it pretty consistent versus 1 week or 1 year might be pushing it, but if it's for a longitudinal study, which longitudinal is just like over a long time period, then you'd want to make sure that they're kind of similar. And then there's inter-rater reliability. So like this is if another person were to administer the same experiment. This is especially important for mental health diagnosis. Would you see the same results? So like this is a big problem in when you're like trying to diagnose a mental health disorder, for example, like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or one of something along those lines. A lot of the times, unless you use a gold standard or like something that's like really, really structured, um, then you probably will get there will be like some differences between diagnosis. Especially because some of them can have a lot of the same requirements for said di medical diagnosis. Um, oh, and a gold standard, yeah, that's just like something that's has really high reliability and validity. So, yeah, there's different types, but that's just like what you want to hold yourself like standard to when you're doing a mental health diagnosis or just in general. Um, and then internal consistency. So if there are multiple parts or questions to your measure, do your participants respond similarly? So I like to also kind of think of this as like a gotcha question sort of. So like if you are doing something, for example, and you're trying to measure like alcoholism again, like maybe you could have like that drinks in like a day you could have or versus like drinks in a week like a little bit later on, and if someone were to say like oh like I have like 2 drinks in a day versus like and then they were to answer it a little later and they're like oh yeah I have like 1 drink a week, like that's how you know that they're not being consistent in their answers, like or you could have something that's not just like for alcoholism. It could be like for a broader construct. Like if you were to say um like let me try to think. If you're like being like how studious you are, right? Like you could say like how many hours a week do you study, and like someone puts like 30, and then they're like, "Oh, like how important do you think school is?" And then like it's a Likert scale, like where 1 is the most and 10 is the least, and they put like in eights. That could also be something that is like a little bit of a red flag. And it could also be just like if your participant isn't really paying attention, and like for example, if they're just like kind of lost focus, or maybe it's for school where they get like extra credit if they fill out a survey. Then if they're just like kind of flipping through the questions and if they're not reading it properly, that could be also like a good red flag that their results probably aren't the most accurate or reflective of your survey. Um, yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say on that. Kind of keeping it short and sweet. Hopefully that made sense. If not, let me know in the comments if it didn't and if I made any big errors. Once again, I am a student and one of my majors is psych, but that doesn't mean I'm not making mistakes. So please, 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 because I'm also studying for the MCAT, so I want to know too. Yeah.